Take a look at this.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
I'm Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. And that after video you saw took 120 hours, which is equivalent to about 30 minutes a day for 4 months. Do you think you know your Spanish level? Most learners are way off, so here's a fast way to find out your real fluency. In this video I'll show you how to quickly and easily measure your real Spanish level, beyond just textbooks, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly where you stand in terms of fluency. And stick around because this advice is actually very unconventional advice, but it's honestly what a lot of people need to hear. So we're gonna go through 4 points. Stick around to the end and there's a free gift waiting for you. So the first thing that I want to go through is goal, okay? Everybody has different goals when it comes to language learning. I think we all know this, right? A lot of people, when I first started, learning Spanish, online there was all this talk about what fluency is, and it's like this perfection of the language, and it's like you're able to perfectly articulate yourself, and that didn't really align to my goals. And so just a quick disclaimer before we start this. Define your goals. A lot of people will take their own goals and then criticize others when others' results don't match their own goals. So for example, one person might tell a bodybuilder, oh, it's too much muscle. But the bodybuilder doesn't care because the bodybuilder wants too much muscle, right? In the same way, it might not align with our goals, right? That doesn't mean he's doing the wrong thing because his results do actually correlate with his goals. And so if your goal truly, like in your heart, you know that your goal with Spanish is to be able to communicate, to be able to have a back and forth with a native, which 99% of people want that, then it makes no sense to have this like arbitrary goal of reaching perfection, right? Or not even perfection, just this idea in mind that you have to have the perfect accent, the perfect, flow and everything. Even though some people have that definition of fluency, not everyone does. And actually, most people just have the definition of fluency as something else, which we'll get into later on. But this is just the first point I wanted to get into. Define your goals. If your goal is native fluency, if you really, your number one goal is just to become just like a native Spanish speaker, by all means, that is what you should be doing to do your goals. This channel, however, is just for reaching conversational fluency as fast as possible. And I've done that myself and I've helped others do that. I have not personally at this moment reached native level fluency, so I would never teach anyone that because I just don't think I have that authority. And so by all means, if you have other goals, great, good for you. Go pursue those goals. But specifically, when I talk about fluency on this channel, we're always talking about what most people think that fluency is, which is a back and forth with a native. If there's a new person in your class who is from Spain, are you able to just bust out your Spanish and start speaking back and forth in a full-blown conversation? If you are, that's fluency. We're going to get into some more definitions of fluency, but next I wanted to cover the CEFR system. So you might have heard of this before. The CEFR system is like, the basic system of measuring your language. So you might have heard of stuff like A1 or B2, right? This comes from the system called the CEFR system. And actually, personally, I don't agree fully with this system. Now, the reason why, and this is like the main quote behind this, the CEFR system isn't a method, and it's also not super accurate because personally for me, when I was able to have conversations, back and forth, I was at like a B1 maybe. And now, apparently I'm like maybe a B2 or the level above that, for example. But the reason why is because this system is not for most people's goals. This system, the CEFR system, is specifically for the context of every part of the language, right? And we only really care about conversations. This also means that if you're for example, a C1, that then you can have a bad accent maybe. Or for example, that you're not as good as back and forth, but you're still better at understanding written literature. But we never cared about written literature in Spanish, did we? And so in my opinion, this isn't the best way to measure your Spanish. And this is why I'm saying that my advice is unconventional, okay? Because the conventional advice is just, okay, where do you sit at? Are you A1, A2, B2? What are you? And I don't agree with that system at all. If you don't know, I'm born and raised in Sweden. And so I learned Swedish growing up. And when I got my grades for Swedish, because in Sweden, of course, you study Swedish, I had gotten better grades, even though Swedish is technically my third language, even though it's like my second best, I would say. I had gotten a B in Swedish, whereas a native Swedish speaker had gotten a C, even though I guess I'm also a native speaker, but it's technically my third language because of the order I learned it in. But either way, his fluency was better than mine. I would admit that his fluency was better than mine, so in the sense that he could just speak much faster and much better, for example, right? And his like accent and stuff was better than mine in Swedish. But I still got a better grade. And that's because when it came to the parts that don't relate to fluency, like reading and writing, I had probably performed better. Or like, we had like national tests and I thought I did pretty well on the written tests for national tests. And so even though my fluency wasn't better, I got a better grade. And so this whole idea that grades correlate to your fluency in the language, or for example, the CEFR system correlates to your fluency, there's a correlation, but it's just like how if there's anyone who goes to the gym, if you're strong at bench press, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a big chest. And if you're not as strong on bench press, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a small chest. And so then what does correlate directly to your fluency? And this is where we go into what I like to call the fluency equation. It's the underlying method that I use to get fluent in Spanish myself in 120 hours of studying, or my client Eduardo, who got fluent in a few hundred hours of studying and saved over 200 hours according to AI. And it's really what I think should be used to measure our fluency because it defines fluency. So let's start at the base level. What is fluency? Real quick before we move on, after years of developing these frameworks and over 100 hours of coaching, I've packed everything into one clear step-by-step program. So if you're serious about learning Spanish, then check the link in the description to join. Back to the video. So I remember when I first thought of what fluency was, and I'd been watching, tons of YouTube videos, and everyone had their different definitions. I eventually came to my perfect definition. So from the YouTubers I'd seen, I recognized a simple definition of fluency, which was fluency is defined as being fluent. If you search it up on Google, if you just search up the direct sort of definition, it's fluency is defined as being fluent. And being fluent is defined as having fluidity when you speak, having flow. In fact, the word for fluency in Spanish is fluidez. And fluidez also means fluidity. And so fluency and fluidity and flow are all connected, both linguistically and by definition. So usually, being fluent is defined as being able to speak effortlessly and articulately. But that isn't accurate in relation to what most people think fluency is. And you know this because you know that when you had the goal of, okay, you want to reach fluency in Spanish, you knew that you didn't really care about speaking articulately, perfectly, no mistakes, no uhs. It's like, sure, it's nice, but that's not the original goal. The original goal was something else. And so another reason why I don't think that being able to speak completely effortlessly and articulately is a great definition of fluency is because if I can speak fast, that doesn't necessitate that I can have conversations and connect with people. The whole goal of language is communication. And communication between two individuals happens through conversations, a back and forth. By definition, a conversation is a back and forth. And I'm not talking about text, I'm talking about a literal spoken back and forth. And so the best way to define fluency, in my opinion, is to do it in two separate categories. And that is conversational fluency and native fluency. So conversational fluency is how I define it as being able to have a conversation in Spanish where both parties understand each other to the point of a conversation. This means that the flow, there still is flow, there's still fluidity, because then by definition, if there isn't any fluidity, then you don't have fluency, okay? But this fluency isn't necessarily only in your speech, but it's in the conversation. It's in the back and forth. If you think about a stream, the stream is constantly flowing, so there's fluidity. But that stream is in the conversation rather than only in your speech. Meaning, if you are able to have a back and forth, you are fluent. And the clarification to that is conversational fluency. And so it's different because you probably know people who don't speak extremely fast and effortlessly and articulately in English, for example, even though they're native English speakers, right? I use this example of a pop singer called Harry Styles, who in one of the interviews that I'd seen, he was speaking very slowly, very like, yeah, I'm Harry Styles. I like to, they're like that, right? He's still fluent in English. Let's not get it wrong, right? But you might be thinking, okay, wait, but then how is he fluent? He's fluent because in the interview, there was a back and forth. There was a conversation. And so the flow, the continual flow of the conversation is where the fluency lies, not necessarily in his words when he speaks. And so that moves me to native level fluency, which is where you are indistinguishable from a native. This means that your accent is on point. You can understand basically every bit of Spanish you hear, and you're essentially perfect in the language in relation to a native. And so I separate it into two categories because you only care about conversational fluency, if you're being honest, because I only cared about conversational fluency. In fact, every single transformation, everything I see online when people get fluent, the point that people really care about isn't the point of just being able to memorize a phrase and just blurt it out, because who cares? What they really care about is you walking into a coffee shop in Spain and being able to have a back and forth. And sure, they might think that you're like from America or that you're a gringo. Who cares? You're able to have a conversation with the guy. You're able to meet your neighbor. Like a few months back, I met this neighbor who I hadn't seen before. He held the door open for me. And so he was, pretty nice. He had a dog with him. And so he asked me like, where are you from? And I said like, oh, I'm from Sweden, but my parents are from Azerbaijan. And then I asked him, where are you from? And he said, I'm from España. And as soon as I heard that, España, I knew, oh, okay, Spain. And then by that point, I told him like, oh, yeah, I started speaking Spanish with him. I was like, oh yeah, aprender español desde 3 años. And then after that, he got off on my floor. And then we had a 30-minute discussion. And I was just telling him about like accents and stuff like that. And this was pretty early when I created this channel, around the first videos, when I had like a buzz cut. And so that is where my fluency lied. I didn't understand every single thing he said. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I didn't understand, like, I understood maybe 90% of the words he said, but sometimes he said words I didn't understand. And then I'd tell him like, oh, yeah, puedes repetir, or something like that, right? And he was happy to do that because there was still a back and forth. And it's not like people like are against you trying to learn their language, right? People are very accepting of that. In fact, people like that. And so even though I wasn't super fluent, and you can literally go back. I have a series on my channel called Trying to Reach Native Fluency. Go back to day 1 and day 7 and stuff. You'll see it's not the best, is it? But like I spoke with Spanish with my neighbor, and then one of the neighbors who lived on my floor said like, she literally opened the door. I think she was like spying on us while on our conversation. She opened the door and was like, she said in Swedish, because she doesn't speak Spanish, she said, I'm jealous of you guys that you guys are able to speak. And so yeah, that situation I described, I bet 99% of people watching this, that's their goal in Spanish. It's the conversation with the neighbor. It's the friends you make in Spain if you travel to Spain. It's not this perfection of the language. And this matters because the goal of fluency is being fluent in the context of conversations. That is then your measuring stick. And so this goes into exactly how we measure our Spanish. Screw this B1, B2 stuff. The CEFR system isn't going to give you the most accurate estimation. Now, honestly, it will still give you an okay estimate, but it doesn't include the parts of fluency that are only used in a conversation, which is speaking and understanding. Because in a conversation, it's back and forth, right? It's you speak and I understand you, and then I speak and you understand me. And so this is what it looks like as the equation. I have other videos on my channel where I go deep into this equation and how to implement it. But otherwise, this is now our measuring stick. If I was to tell you, okay, how good are you at bench press? Would you rather do 200 push-ups and then have a rough estimation of what that correlates to your bench press? Or would you do a bench press and find out your max? Right? You would do the bench press. And so if we define fluency as being able to have flow in a conversation, a back and forth, then your measuring stick is a back and forth with a native. And so how do you measure your Spanish? Go on 10 calls with a native using Hello Talk. Find a Spanish speaker and have 10 conversations with them. Out of those conversations, how many of them did you fully understand what they said and then you had a back and forth? How many of them had flow in them, a back and forth flow? If it's 10 out of 10, boom, you're conversation fluent. If it's, let's say, 8 out of 10, you're almost there. If it's 5 out of 10, not quite. And if it's 0 out of 10, you're a beginner. That is your measuring stick. It's just the same as like saying, what's your bench press max? And then you're like, oh, I haven't done bench press, but it's about 350 push-ups. What does that correlate to bench, right? Even though if you can do maybe tons of push-ups, you probably do have a pretty impressive bench. Just like how if you're a C1, you're very likely to be, conversation fluent. But why would we do these unnecessary correlations when we could just do the initial test directly? If the test is, where's your fluency in terms of conversations, have conversations to find out. And so that is how you measure your fluency in an accurate way that isn't connected to this arbitrary and, fake goal of perfection in the language, which you and me don't care about. And so as promised, you can check the description to grab my free, easy to use Cognate cheat sheet to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words. There's no email needed. I don't collect emails and sell you stuff. It's literally just completely free. Click the link and you get a cheat sheet that will unlock you thousands of Spanish words in literally just like, you can literally learn them in like one sitting in like 10 minutes and you'll unlock thousands of Spanish words. And that's just my thank you gift for reaching the end of this video. Otherwise, I would appreciate it if you share this video with someone who you think would benefit. and, subscribe, like, and do all the YouTube stuff. Or not, you can just enjoy the free stuff. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed and stay humble.